So, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to this third lecture for today in the special lecture series. We now have a session of high relevance on how to promote quality, excellence, and work culture in a university or business school. The session will be taken up by Dr. C. Rajkumar, Vice Chancellor, OP Jindal Global University, Sonipat. Robert Collier, American author of New Thought metaphysical book, asserts that success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out. Unquote. Leading the way as a torchbearer, OP Jindal Global University, Sonipat, has been a trailblazer in Indian higher education. It has developed a world class infrastructure and faculty within a decade of its establishment. When the Ministry of Education selected 20 institutes of eminence in 2017-18, OP Jindal Global University found its place among the top 10 private universities listed under the scheme of Institutes of Eminence. We can learn a lot about institution building from this success story of the university. All such path-breaking achievements have been possible under the inspiring leadership of the visionary Dr. C. Rajkumar, and it's an honor to briefly introduce respected professor to all present in this session. He has to his credit academic qualifications from Delhi University and then subsequently from Oxford, Harvard, and University of Hong Kong. With the philanthropic support of Mr. Naveen Jindal, he established JGU in Sonipat, Haryana in 2009. Professor C. Rajkumar, a Rhodes Scholar, is the founding Vice Chancellor of JGU. He was appointed as the VC at the age of 34 in 2009. JGU is one of the only 20 universities in India which has been declared as an institution of eminence by the Government of India, and JGU has completed a decade and grown into a multidisciplinary, research-oriented university with 9 different schools relating to law, business, international affairs, public policy, liberal arts and humanities, journalism and communication, art and architecture, environment and sustainability. The university has acquired a stellar reputation in India and abroad for its effort to promote community service. Professor Rajkumar is an accomplished legal scholar and works in the field of human rights and development, comparative constitutional law, terrorism and national security, corruption and governance, and higher education. He has 7 books and over 150 publications to his credit and has published widely in peer reviewed journals, law reviews in Australia, Hong Kong, India, Singapore, UK, and US. He has co authored several books and numerous research papers. He has multiple assignments. He has held multiple consultancy assignments in the field of human rights and governance. He also serves as the founding dean of Jindal Global Law School and director of the International Institute for Higher Education Research and Capacity Building. An exemplary leader who leads by example, I humbly welcome Dr. Rajkumar and kindly request him to take over the session. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kulshasta. And first of all, I would like to thank and appreciate the kind invitation extended to me by Professor Dr. Chaturvedi. Professor Chaturvedi has been a very dear friend and a mentor, distinguished director of BIMTech, and we, of course, work in numerous other capacities as well. I've had the privilege to visit the campus and deliver a talk there and interacted with your students and faculty, and I'm very delighted that despite the challenge of the pandemic, the work that all of us do as educators remains important and continues uninterrupted. And I want to, first of all, place on record the deep appreciation that I have for BIMTech and for Dr. Chaturvedi and the distinguished faculty members of BIMTech for continuing this effort. In fact, the less said aspect of the global pandemic has been the role of educators, right from schools to colleges to universities, all the way from March 2020 onwards. The largest story has been the role of the healthcare workers, which is, of course, very significant, and they have been working very hard. But the less talked about, the less celebrated, and less recognized, less appreciated in a set of individuals remain the educators of the world. And I want to pay tribute to all the educators in this room, in this discussion today. And also I want to thank and appreciate the contribution of BIMTech in ensuring that we have a faculty development workshop. This is a kind of a good opportunity for people coming together and engaging on some of the big issues of our time. And I'm deeply impressed with the sort of galaxy of individuals who have been speaking on sessions that were held yesterday and today, and also it ends up going tomorrow as well. So it's wonderful to be here. Now, the theme of my talk today is in relation to how to promote quality, excellence, and work culture in a university slash business school. And I would like to essentially make a simple argument that ultimately, whether it is a university, a standalone business school, or a part of a larger institution, the core aspects of quality and excellence and work culture are universally similar. And to that extent, I don't see any distinction between these elements, at least from the standpoint of whether it is a university or a standalone B school. Now, let me begin by sort of outlining some of the broader role and commitments of universities in general. The greater higher education institutions of the world are, or rather the ones which have been accomplished over a long period of time, are defined by a culture of excellence in their endeavor. They are underpinned by a vision, plan, and culture that can be understood and embraced by its community and the communities that they serve. They maintain their institutional credibility, reputation, and integrity by jealously safeguarding their academic freedom as well as autonomy, by delivering high quality education, contributing to research, and instilling a deep sense of pride in their institutions and work that they do to take care of their people, which includes the broader university slash business school community. They take pride in upholding the highest standards of decision making, oversight, control, transparency, and ethical standards, and also accountability. Now, higher education institutions are largely founded on the principles of creation of knowledge through research and dissemination by teaching, but also over the last, say, a century or so, they have expanded their role and are contributing to the society at large in numerous ways. There are higher education institutions and faculty which are contributing to policy making, to in developing new ideas, contributing to innovation, creating new technologies, addressing public policy issues and reforms relating to policy. In fact, the broader mandate of university and the business school has increased quite substantially. Regardless of their public or private character, they are universally expected to pursue the vision of a common good and entrusted with the responsibility of providing access to education and democratization of knowledge. In fact, they take enormous effort to provide opportunities for teaching and learning and research as public service to society, especially its youth. And this element of public service is deeply embedded in the institutional character of all universities and including business schools. In fact, there are debates surrounding the very idea of to what extent a business school can contribute to public service, and this is an inherently, important character of any academic institution, including a business school, which is to contribute towards public service. Now, as far as the business school context is concerned, we have to recognize that we live in times where stakeholders at all levels, students, faculty, and staff, potential employers of students, regulatory bodies, and internationally recognized accrediting agencies and even rankings organizations are increasingly asking and demanding for quality assurance and excellence in higher education. Business schools are no exception to this. Like in a university, the pursuit of excellence in teaching and research inevitably ought to be the most important objective. The students remain at the center of institutional governance in them, and all efforts ought to be taken with the view to fulfilling their goals and aspirations. Now, they too cannot function within binding organizational structures that breach the very foundation of academic freedom and autonomy that drive them. Now, business schools, like universities and other higher education institutions, play a very significant role in shaping societies that are fair, equitable, progressive, and just. Pluralistic thoughts and diversity of ideas are the bedrock of life and learning in them. In doing so, they must reflect the translation of the best aspirations of their societies. Indeed, the pursuit of excellence in teaching and research, a democratic leadership rooted in a transformative vision, maintaining valued academic, social, and industry collaborations, and promotion of a work culture that is free of biases, prejudices, and discrimination ought to be their critical attributes. Now, their accountability should be based upon their own sense of commitment and capacities to fulfill their stated mission, which in turn, I believe, must be benchmarked against the global standards of quality. Now, let me briefly reflect on the current areas of developmental challenges. Historically, the challenges that have impacted and affected higher education institutions in the developing world, including India, end up being the lack of infrastructure, regulatory boundaries, limiting academic autonomy and institutional freedom, something that Dr. Chaturvedi has fought for a good part of his life, constraints emanating from the lack of financial freedom, lack of actionable plan for continuous quality improvement, transparent governance, as well as accountability, lack of a system that attracts bright talent into pursuing a career in teaching, gender imbalances, and the near absence of incentives to boost philanthropy and investment in the education sector. These are by no means comprehensive in nature, but some of the broader challenges that the Indian higher education system has faced for a very long time. Now, these challenges continue to affect and impact the higher education sector in India in varying forms, and number of institutions have attempted to address them as well, especially in private sector, be they universities or business schools or other institutions. Now, the last year has been quite extraordinary when it comes to the impact of the higher education sector due to COVID-19. From early 2020, universities, business schools, and other higher education institutions across the world have faced unprecedented challenges as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak. They have been forced to switch to online learning and digital tools in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. Many are still struggling to negotiate the crisis, even as students and staff have been dramatically impacted by the spread of the pandemic, from travel restrictions to social distancing, isolation measures, quarantines, campus and border closures, and digital divides. It is clear that COVID-19 crisis and beyond, universities have to work to consistently review, improve, and even alter their crisis management and risk mitigation strategies and initiatives. I strongly believe that the future is going to be based upon our ability to embrace flexibility, agility, and capacity building in rapidly transitioning to changing emergency conditions while maintaining quality assurance, higher standards in course delivery and research, and student enrollment driven by that quality, and in providing clear communication to students and faculty and staff, to name a few. Now, let me go deep into this particular aspect of which is the theme of today's discussion, which is the significance of quality, excellence, and work culture. The meaning of the term quality is multifaceted. In the context of higher education outcomes, it means paying attention to the student experience and graduate outcomes that are consciously sensitive to the aspiration of the students, expectations of our societies, and the social and economic needs of our times. It also means that we need to ensure that students attain the economic and social goals they aspire to achieve, and this is neither easy nor impossible. This requires that we pay close attention to processes, build institutional mechanisms, and nurture organizational cultures that reflect underlying institutional vision, mission, and expectations. The significance of excellence is something that is even more harder to define. The need to continually invest, facilitate, and incentivize the possibilities and potentialities of excellence in institutional ethos is one of the most difficult challenges that we need to confront. The global ranking framework have increasingly become an indicator of the institutional quality and excellence of higher education institutions, and are a powerful measure of the real world impact of universities and business schools and their role as knowledge creators. They demonstrate the need for stronger and sharper attention to issues of quality and excellence to be paid by universities and business schools to break into the lead ranking tables of the world. It is also important that building strong institutional mechanisms to enhance institutional reputation using research and collaborations, hiring reputed faculty, ensuring a healthy faculty student ratio, and other such matters. The third aspect of the theme that we are going to discuss today is relating to the significance of work culture. Now, diversity and inclusion at the workplace are multidimensional paradigms. They have some elements that can be measured and others that may be more consequential, that may be more impact oriented, and yet even intangible. Yet, it means to make significant progress free of biases and discrimination on some of the key dimensions, such as gender parity, diversified regional representation in both student body and staff positions, faculty educational backgrounds, and representation of women in academic leadership positions. It's also important that we recognize the need for building and nourishing a culture of trust, respect, and collegiality among the leadership as well as the colleagues. It's also important for us to recognize that pluralistic thoughts and diversity of ideas are the bedrock of life and learning in a higher education institution, and that ought to become the part of the work culture that we hope to achieve. So, the question that we have before us is, how do higher education institutions meet or exceed the expectations of its students, faculty and staff, potential employers of students, regulatory bodies, accreditation organizations, etc.? What policies, procedures, practices, and leadership and governance standards should be in place to ensure that an academic institution in the form of a business school or a university is meeting all of its duties and obligations in terms of quality as defined in a plan? To begin with, they must strive to have leadership and organizational capacity building in governance, quality assurance, outcomes assessment, and assurance of learning and leadership. Developing their infrastructure according to demands, even as they take due care of the environment and diversity. There is no doubt about the fact that we need to work towards improving the faculty student ratio, establish more research centers, and indeed opportunities for faculty to pursue research. There is also a need for generating more socially relevant and impactful knowledge, provide an interdisciplinary learning environment, something that standalone business schools are going to increasingly face the challenge. In fact, one of the big challenges of any standalone institutions, including the great IITs and IIMs and institutions of great repute, such as the BIMTech, is how do we create a multidisciplinary learning environment? The National Education Policy 2020 has highlighted the importance of multidisciplinarity, and it ought to become and deeply embedded in the culture of academic institutions. It's also important for us to recognize that academic freedom and institutional autonomy need to be highlighted. They cannot function in isolated terms, and they need to become part of a culture of a university. So, I want to quickly mention that draw upon what Nelson Mandela, in his own words, said: education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world, unquote. So a 5-point framework for quality excellence work culture, which has been outlined here for me to share with you, is as follows. First, ensuring quality in, let's say, the 1,000 universities that we have and the 6,000 business schools, we need to commit to uphold internationally recognized standards of quality assurance and institutional accreditation. This will require excellence in teaching and learning, as well as excellence in student experience, as well as learning outcomes. It's also equally important that the regulatory bodies must not increase the burden on universities and business schools, and they must inspire confidence by increasing accountability and transparency and encourage regulatory autonomy to avoid bureaucratic overlaps. The third aspect is the need for adaptive regulatory frameworks, which I briefly touched upon earlier. The fourth aspect is to create outcome-based regulatory frameworks. Here, it's important to mention that strenuous efforts need to be made so that we can adopt the best higher education practices and use it with the view to advancing the quality of academic engagement that we have. Now, when it comes to the question of creating equity in opportunities and culture to improve learning and working, we need to recognize the importance of merit in access to higher education opportunities, yet make an effort to promote diversity. Now, in the wake of COVID-19 and the consequent shift to online learning, the digital divide has significantly increased. Online learning may become part of the way forward. The question is to what extent the gross enrollment ratio and the general interest in higher education is at a risk owing to the demands of a post-COVID world. Universities must bridge the gap by employing digital resources to gain wider access. But for this to effectively happen, we need to focus on investing in education in a significant manner. Community engagement that positively impacts the local and regional communities they serve should be advanced. We need to awaken the entrepreneurial spirit in our students and strengthen the industry academic cooperation. And this is something which the business school does very well. As I begin to conclude my thoughts on this theme, I would like to recognize that the future depends on what we do in the present. And those were the words of none other than Mahatma Gandhi. Therefore, how do we promote and champion the vision and mission of a university, a business school that aligns itself to quality, excellence, and work culture will depend upon how much we are prepared to seek organizational transformation. There has to be a new imagination for both Indian universities and Indian business schools, one which draws inspiration from the past, but also one which has to look to the future. Transformational change needs to take place at every level of policy making, regulation, and governance in higher education if Indian universities and business schools are serious about seeking global excellence and achieving higher education rankings. For the government and regulatory bodies, the way forward is to act on the vision of university autonomy from the Declaration on Academic Freedom and Autonomy of Higher Education passed in Lima, Peru, way back in September 1988. The declaration affirmed what autonomy means, and I quote, the independence of institutions of higher education from the state and all other forces of society to make decisions regarding internal governance, finance, administration, and to establish its own policies of education, research, extension work, and other related matters, unquote. We need a long-term horizon to understand the pivotal role of universities and business schools in accelerating the socio-economic growth of a nation and the vision of building a knowledge society. For business schools, the 10-point agenda that commit themselves to new standards of quality, excellence, and a work culture that is based upon equity and fairness entails the following. First, ensuring internationally recognized standards of quality assurance and institutional accreditation based upon quality assurance. Number two, excellence in teaching and research and an equitable work culture which will create a world-class ecosystem by fostering a distinctive excellence to its work. Three, bringing meaningful collaborations and partnerships with leading international institutions. Fourth, reorienting themselves to be research-driven. Five, developing infrastructure that focuses on academic as well as extracurricular platforms for both students and faculty with a view to transcend the academic engagement that goes beyond teaching and learning. Six, creating a system of oversight, control, transparency, accountability, integrity, and ethical standards in governance. Seven, nourishing the commitment to work for better outcomes for the community, the environment, the nation, and the world at large. Eight, enabling and rewarding collegiality, being inclusive, open, and respectful. 9, creating a safe space for a diverse set of people and opinions and ideas to flourish. And 10, to cultivate the entrepreneurial spirit in students and strengthening industry academic collaboration for achieving that. As I conclude, because one of the things that I deeply care about in any organization, including a university or a business school, is the last part of it, which will actually define the first two, which is work culture and broadly culture in general. And one of the things that have always inspired me personally is something that I've read long ago, and I want to share this with you because this actually shapes the type of organizational ethos that we want to have in any institution. And it's not easy, and I'm going to share that thought with you. This is about the concept of Ubuntu. Ubuntu essentially means, and I quote, "I am what I am because of who we all are," unquote. The word Ubuntu has its origins in one of the Bantu dialects of Africa. It is a traditional African philosophy that provides us an understanding of ourselves in relation with the world. According to Ubuntu, and I quote, "There exists a common bond between us all, and it is through this bond, through our interaction with our fellow human beings, that we discover our own human qualities," unquote. Or as the Zulus would say, that a person is a person through other persons. We affirm our humanity when we acknowledge that of others, unquote. The South African Nobel laureate Archbishop Desmond Tutu describes Ubuntu as, and I quote, "It is the essence of being human. It speaks of the fact that my humanity is caught up and is inextricably bound up in yours. I am human because I belong." It speaks about wholeness. It speaks about compassion. A person with Ubuntu is welcoming, hospitable, warm, and generous, willing to share. Such people are open and available to others, willing to be vulnerable, affirming of others, do not feel threatened that others are able and good, for they have a proper self-assurance that comes from knowing that they belong in a greater whole. They know that they are diminished when others are humiliated, diminished when others are oppressed, diminished when others are treated as if they were less than who they are. The quality of Ubuntu gives people resilience, enabling them to survive and emerge still despite all efforts to dehumanize them, unquote. So, as I end this talk, I want to say that one of the most challenging aspects of institution building is to create a work culture that brings to it the concept of Ubuntu. To what extent we can bring Ubuntu to the very concept of institution building, which in turn can permeate the work culture in an organization, in an institution, in a business school, in a university, which then will lay the foundations for quality and excellence and other institutional goals that we want to promote. I want to conclude by saying that as we look at the future of higher education and management education, I am very confident that some of the big transformative changes that we are going through now will in many ways shape the future. There is going to be a space for online education, and that's going to grow and grow significantly. But I also mean that the brick and mortar campuses are not going to disappear, and that space will remain strong. It is equally important for us to recognize that some of the values that we just talked about today, including the value of maintaining quality and promoting excellence and creating work culture, these aspects are going to be stronger and will actually define the future of management education as well. It's also equally important, as I conclude, to draw upon another fascinating book that I've read, and I keep reading it again and again because it has been an inspiring book about, a very important concept, which I think particularly we should teach it in business schools more, but we should also teach it in law schools and other schools as well, which is, the title of the book is called "What Money Can't Buy: The Moral Limits of Markets." This book is written by Michael Sandel, who's a distinguished political and moral philosopher based out of Harvard. And Michael Sandel has consistently argued in the entire book about the very notions of how increasingly we are becoming a society that is uh, that is being looked at purely from monetary terms. He's actually talked about the idea of the consequence of a society which is entirely based upon measuring it in monetary terms is twofold. One, widespread inequalities, and second, institutionalized forms of corruption. The consequence of a society in which everything that we do is measured in monetary terms are these two consequences. And he has given several case studies from around the world. In a way, the larger point that I want to address is that as we look at shaping the future of our young minds, we as educators have a very big role and responsibility to create an inspiring and transformative ecosystem in our own institutions. And that is why the discussions and debates surrounding quality, excellence, and work culture is at the heart of the future. With those words, I'm going to stop here. Since we have another 15 minutes, I would like to take some questions and happy to answer those as well. Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much. So, with your permission, I'll take up the questions in the chat box.
Sure, please.
So, Dr. Meena Bhatia, she would like to know, we always discuss what more faculty members should be doing. If you can tell us what is that faculty members shouldn't be doing.
Oh, well, first of all, I mean, I think one of the things that we need to, well, first, I think, okay, let's start with the basics. Students are very conscious of observing what they see in us. So, in a way, our responsibility as an educator is about ensuring that we don't do anything that will ultimately shape the thought process and the minds of our students. Now, I'll give you a very personal experience in this, and I kind of learned it in a very hard way. So, like Dr. Chaturvedi and many of us who run institutions, I work very hard, maybe, I don't know, 14 hours a day or more. And I go home late. And whenever I go home, my young son, this happened several years ago, he would be watching television. And I will enter my home and see him watching television. And I'll slightly reprimand him and tell him that, what are you doing? This is not right. Whenever I come, you're watching television. And I will go to my room and, change and then start watching television. And this would be my routine. And this was always happening. This is my routine. I'll just shout at him a bit and then I'll go and watch television. So on one weekend when we were relaxing, he asked me, you always shout at me when I'm watching television when you come, but that's exactly what you do. I mean, every day you do the same thing. And I was just thinking at that moment that, young people, we can tell them whatever we like, but they are actually not listening what we tell them. They are actually observing what we do. So that's a very big responsibility that we have with us. So the first thing I would say is that be extremely mindful and conscious of what you do and how you act, because you're constantly observed, not by some dean or director or vice chancellor, but by the students. And they are going to do exactly what they are seeing in what you're doing. The second thing, of course, I would say is that it's a very important part of any culture that, one of the things I've felt in many academic institutions that I've noticed is the deep level of distrust that prevails between the leadership and management and administration on the one hand and the faculty on the other. I am not prepared to say that this is not in some circumstances justified, but the reality is you cannot achieve the fullest success of an institution when there is not even a modicum of trust between. A certain amount of distrust actually is useful. That's part of the democratic spirit in which academic institutions should thrive. But if that, minimal distrust goes beyond the time, beyond the levels in which it should prevail, it can potentially impact and affect the very idea of a healthy institution. And the last thing I would say is that be more forgiving, because I think all of us do make mistakes, And it's important for us to develop a culture in which we are more forgiving about the other. And I think these are some things which I believe will be useful for a faculty member.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is from Professor Dubey. Can online education lead a situation when education can be consumed as Netflix is for entertainment?
Sorry, I didn't fully get the question. Please,
So
what is it?
the question is, can online education lead to a situation where education can be consumed as Netflix is being for entertainment?
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, I for one strongly believe that there are very many aspects of education which can be extremely useful and consumed like entertainment. For example, there are fantastic movies out there which we actually consume as entertainment, but there is so much of education in it. And all of us have, I recently watched a movie which is called Mauritiana. It is an amazing, compelling story about a man who was, languishing in Guantanamo Bay for years together with absolutely no evidence. I think he spent nearly 2 decades in Guantanamo Bay with no evidence at all and no charge made. Not 2 decades, maybe a decade, all through the time when Guantanamo Bay was active. And finally, he was not. It's no question of acquittal because he was simply kept in a prison. Now it raised so much of issues surrounding law and morality and justice and all of that. So I have no problem, and I think it's a desirable issue aspect of it. There are there are two other consequences of that. First of all, is the aspect of how intrusive online education is, and that's a very serious challenge that we need to ask in India. Because one of the concerns I have personally is that BIMTech and Jindal are very privileged institutions. We could do all what we're doing in online and offline and things like that. But in a country where the estimates are, 15 to 20% of our households have uninterrupted electricity, reasonable Wi-Fi connection, and an equipment for children or students to have access. The fact that we need to really build that infrastructure. Otherwise, the digital divide is going to be even more stronger, as we have seen through the pandemic. The second aspect of the online education challenge is not so much about access. We can address access by what I just said. To what extent we can, infuse human values such as empathy, understanding of the other, the emotional intelligence, and that we need to build one's own personal character. To what extent we can help people understand what's right and what isn't, to develop opportunities for people to work together in team, understanding different personalities. Those are the type of issues where online education is going to face even more challenges, even the most advanced forms of online education. Where online education is going to be extremely useful is the ones for the more mature individuals, and where those who are already in corporations, companies, business enterprises, in profession, who didn't want to quit their job and want to get high quality education. And if there are high quality programs emerging, online education could be a very good option.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is from Dr. Abhijit Chaturaj. He wants to know, do you think that too much regulatory meddling undermines quality in terms
Oh,
of...
absolutely. We are all victims of it. It's kind of, it's so ridiculous what we, I think Dr. Chaturvedi is still protected because he's in a business school alone. University vice chancellors are, constantly tortured with all kinds of, like if you are a university vice chancellor today, you are asked the same piece of information by 10 different bodies with 10 different formats and 10 different ways of providing the same data. It's absolutely ridiculous. And every now and then, new ways of, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's exactly how many of these things have worked. So I totally, all of us are frustrated with this idea. Now, the problem is many institutions have come about in recent times, or rather for the last several decades, who do not share the educational vision of what, let's say, BIMTech and Jindal has. And so we have to figure out a way to address that. Unfortunately, in our country, we are very bad in making distinctions and differentiation when it comes to dealing with regulation. So one size fits all framework of doing regulations have done more harm to us than it has ever promoted quality. So quality, unfortunately, will increasingly be about internal checks and balances and internal quality assurance mechanisms, so that you have to raise your own bar and standards. Many a time, I don't want to discuss some things in public domain, but many a time, the quality benchmarks and standards which are imposed upon us by externalities of any kind are actually very poor indicators of quality, and end up having a much lower bar than what we would have within our institutions. So in some ways, we need to challenge that, and that's part of a larger body which Dr. Chaturvedi in EPSI and other places we are doing. It's a continuing struggle that we need to be part of.
So the next question is from Professor Dubey. How confident you feel that promised NEP 20 will see the light of the day?
Well, it's a fascinating question. I mean, listen, I have been, like many of us, I have been a very strong, votary of the NEP. And I believe, national education policy is a very, very promising, vision for ensuring that we are able to, what you call, create a future of higher education. But I have written about it, and I will, I don't want to spend too much time on this. There's an article that I had written in the Indian Express on the implementation of the national education policy, and I made reference to a very interesting work by three authors: Bob Hudson, David Hunter, and Stephen Peckham. They have identified four contributors to policy failure. First, overtly optimistic expectations. Second, implementation and dispersed governance. Third, inadequate collaborative policy making. And fourth, vagaries of the political cycle. Now, these four could be the story of most policy failures. And the authors suggest that there is a need to develop a robust policy support program if we are to be serious about implementing any policy. And I will make a quick reference to what they've said. They have said, and I quote, "The four threats to successful policy implementation are so widespread that simply hoping that normal procedures and channels will be sufficient to resolve them is no longer realistic. At a minimum, a better understanding is needed of the processes through which policy moves and how, and at each of these points, policy can best be supported. Four sequential points can be identified: preparation, tracking, support, and review," unquote. Now, NEP is the very, very preliminary stage of this whole process. While many of us celebrate the vision that the NEP has promoted, I'm afraid we really need to do a lot to make it a reality as opposed to just being an idea.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is from Professor Pratik Priyadarshi. He would like to know your views on what is the role of dissent vis-a-vis the idea of development and discipline.
So, Professor Priyadarshi, I'm a lawyer. So, lawyers are, we've always been, condemned for dissent, and so it's part of the territory and terrain we have always operated. And the greatest dissenters of the last century happened to be Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru and Sardar Patel and Rajendra Prasad and so many others. So I have never been uncomfortable with dissent that comes with the terrain. But I think what we should really be focusing on is the type of aspect, how we can develop the constructive element of dissent towards enhancing and improving and developing. It's not so much the idea of discipline, which is very much, I suppose, the arguments that end up being made in more societies which are not necessarily democratic. In democratic societies, the possibility of dissent is deeply embedded both within the constitution as well as the political and civic culture. And so dissent is not necessarily a problem. But the question that we need to address is to what extent dissent ends up being creating violence in society, to what extent dissent leads to undermining the ability of democratic institutions to function effectively. Those are aspects which we need to pay more attention to, and we cannot compromise on that. As far as the idea of development itself is concerned, I think we should be comfortable for having debates surrounding the different visions of development too. And there is, even within the faculty, for example, for all of us who have worked in universities, I think it is only fair to say that many of these discussions and debate further enhances the quality of the outcomes that we ultimately create. Now, where I mean, I'm sure Dr. Chaturvedi and I, we face those situations a lot. There will be times when we will end up saying that we may disagree about on this matter, but we will have to take a call and take decisions which we believe would be in the best interest of the institution. But to suppress the possibility of a disagreement, or to have the opportunity for people to debate and disagree, that is the death knell for the future of any institution, including any nation. So we need to be conscious of that.
So thank you. The next question is from Dr. Manas Kumar Pal. He would like to know what will be the focus and preparedness of a new university with regard to quality assurance.
Yeah, well, so I think the starting point of a quality assurance framework in any university system or academic institutions is the importance that we pay when it comes to recruitment of faculty, because most of what quality assurance, at least in the academic context, is driven in a university or a business school, is driven by the faculty members. So at least from where we stand, we pay a lot of importance to the type of faculty members we want to recruit and the type of individuals we want to bring into the faculty. The second aspect of the quality assurance framework is that what are the objectives of the learning that we want to create within the institution. This will require aspects of curriculum, course structure, program development, teaching pedagogy, and all those aspects which are the nuts and bolts of institutional governance in an academic institution. And all those things require a careful examination when it comes to determining quality. The third thing is something which I think in good institutions have always implemented, with regard to having constructive feedback, both internally and externally, both at the level of faculty feedback, at the level of institutional mechanisms in the form of advisory board feedback, and ultimately leading to the implementation in which when faculty members are teaching courses, the student feedback. All of them will inform our own commitment to maintaining quality assurance in the programs that we do. I think it's now, of course, as business school, I'm slightly familiar with the AACSB type accreditation process, which talks about the way quality assurance is. One of the fears that I have, and I'm speaking as an outsider, not from the being in the business school, but from an outsider, is that many of the quality assurance mechanisms that I have seen are increasingly, I worry that they become a tick box type model of quality assurance, as opposed to integrating quality assurance mechanism into the culture and the aspiration to promote excellence. In some ways, these are all inextricably linked, and for us to somehow de-link quality assurance from both culture and excellence would be a mistake. And this is where a lot of internal strengthening of academic mechanisms and committee structures need to be made within an institution, because that will drive the agenda of quality assurance.
Thank you, sir. And then last quick question would be, where do you see the trade-off between customizing pedagogy to address diversity and achieving scale of economies?
Well, listen, this is obviously a very important question. I think it is natural for universities and business schools to think about, if we expand, to what extent expansion can impact our ability to offer high quality education, to customize the needs and aspirations of students. Nobody has found the perfect answer. The classic American liberal arts colleges are very small institutions which have the ability to maintain that. Quality and quantity are aspects which most of the time don't go together. But I think what we can do is, now there is enough indication or other indicators to measure that even when you expand your institution with regard to both schools, programs, and faculty and students, or other students, you can use faculty student ratio as a very important benchmark as to how much you are, putting in your resources to ensure that the learning objectives are not in any way compromised. You can use benchmarks of the kind of opportunities that you're giving for students, for even when you expand the type of programs. You can use the benchmark of what kind of industry interface are available for the largest number of students, so that expansion does not compromise on your ability to collaborate with organizations. Those are some of the indicators that will help you to achieve that. But listen, this is one of the reasons why I have always maintained that education has to be a not-for-profit activity. I have never been impressed with the idea that we can promote for-profit universities, or for that matter, for-profit business schools. I have enormous respect and admiration for BIMTech, because it was part of the vision to create an institution that is going to contribute to society, and also that the promoters are not looking at this institution as one more channel for making money. And so if that remains the ethos of the institution, then some of the challenges with regard to the scale of economies can be better addressed, so that we can promote greater degree of both individual and collective philanthropy, which in turn can support the institution's mandate. Because frankly speaking, and this is true with business schools and universities, is that what the you cannot measure in just as you can measure output, you cannot measure the outcome or the output of a university or business school in pure monetary terms, as Michael Sandel argued. You have to look at it from the largest contribution to the society at large, and to what extent it has contributed to the civilizational heritage, which is a long-term span, and you can't be measuring it in a quarter to quarter or year to year, or even a decade. So that is why we need to focus on the type of institutions that BIMTech and Jindal is the philosophies underpinning those institutions.
Thank you so much. So, I think before, so there's another quick one more question after the last question we had from Satya. So, this question is from Dr. P. Nayak. He would like to know, can management education be offered in liberal arts model?
Well, it's a great question. In fact, I will say two things. One is that uh, a lot of liberal arts should be infused into management education. I mean, there's no doubt about it, right? I mean, I have said that before. We need to help our engineers learn more than engineering, and we need to help our management students learn more than just business and aspect finance and things like that. But liberal arts education actually encompasses the study of business as well. So from that standpoint, from curriculum and pedagogy standpoint, we can do a lot. But I think your larger question seems to be that the liberal arts education that United States in particular offers in some colleges is based upon a faculty-student ratio and a kind of a very small group of students. I mean, the liberal arts colleges have 1,500 students, 2,000 students, and a very large number of faculty to manage the whole thing. Now, that has been possible because of a history of philanthropy spread over a long period of time. There's a culture of philanthropy that is deeply embedded. It is possible that we can attempt to do that. But I think there's one major difference. We didn't talk about it much, but we need to also differentiate between, even in management education, the MBA degree, as in the master's degree, as well as which is a professional advancement towards the next stage of a career, and undergrad education. Liberal education or liberal arts education is more about undergrad education, where many of these things that we talked about, shaping their mind and creating opportunities for them, which is very different from management education, because at the end of the day, most people who do MBA or pursue master's degree of any kind are looking at it from the next step of their career and potentially a job opportunity, which is not necessarily the case. And in the undergrad education, where we can do a lot more experimentation.
Thank you so much. So thank you, Dr. Rajkumar. I've been trying very hard to keep up with your pace. So a lot of pearls of wisdom. Some I could gather, some still spilled out. So quickly, kind of summarizing some of the points which I could cover were contributing to the society and at large is the broader mandate of higher education institutes. In the wake of pandemic, the ability to maintain flexibility and crisis management. To ensure quality, it is important to pay attention to the student experience, close attention to processes and mechanisms, interdisciplinary learning environment, the 10 commandments, and Ubuntu. And I think I'm still falling short of many of the points which you had covered. So thank you so very much. And we're really fortunate to have you with us. And I hand over the session to Group Sir, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajkumar. And thank you very much, Riti, for a great job of anchoring the afternoon sessions.